Afternoon. This is Sunday, November the 12th, 2017. This is what we call Miracles in Manhattan. It's a one Sunday afternoon per month presentation, lecture, class on the Course in Miracles. We've been doing this since May of 2013. We did all 31 chapters of the Course between then and June of 2016, and now we're just doing different topics based on the Course, and once in a while I have guest speakers that come in and join me as well. And today I thought we would begin to do the psychotherapy pamphlet from the Course, and it's going to take 2 months. I could see that. I have 50-some slides. I don't think I'll get through all 50 slides today. Maybe I will. We'll see how it goes. But I didn't finish the book in terms of the slides from the psychotherapy pamphlet. Tell you a little bit about the psychotherapy pamphlet. I had a little part to play in this, which was sort of interesting for me. It was written in early 1975. The Course was finished in 1972. Bill and Ken were saying to Helen, is there anything else? Did you write anything else? And she says, well, there are these psychotherapy notes. Well, that got them kind of excited because that would be something different. And so they finally, but she hadn't finished it. She'd only done 13 of the 24 pages. And so I had met them in '73 at a conference. I think you know that story. But I then had a letter that I wrote published in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology in 1974, in which I expressed interest in being in contact with anybody who was working in the fields of psychotherapy and spirituality, because I was working on a dissertation on that at that time. And Bill saw my letter in the journal and told Helen, he says, look, remember meeting this guy? And he's asking for this material, and you need to finish this so you could give it to him. So Helen agreed to finish writing the psychotherapy pamphlet. She finished it in April of 1975, and called me and said, I have something for you. And I didn't know what she was talking about, but she asked me if I would come meet with her and Ken and Bill in Ken's little tiny studio apartment, which is just 5 blocks from where we are right this moment, on East 17th Street here in New York City. And I was just living in Chelsea over on 21st Street. So I actually walked over that night, and Helen set me down on, she sat on Ken's daybed and told me about the Course and how it came into existence, and a little bit about what it said, and gave me the pamphlet. At that point, it was just a manuscript of the psychotherapy pamphlet. And I do remember walking home that night thinking that maybe the most important thing that ever happened to me just happened, but I wasn't at all sure what it was. And it took me a while to begin to read the psychotherapy pamphlet, and I still didn't understand it. Well, I mean, I did a little bit, of course, but I didn't understand the depth of it. And it wasn't actually until the course we started off working with a manuscript copy called the Criswell edition in late '75. But I didn't really begin to understand it until July '76, when I had that near-death experience thing, and that really opened my eyes to understanding that there is no world and there's no time and there's no body and we're not even here, and All of it suddenly made sense, which hadn't made sense before. So anyhow, that's just my little tiny role in that. But I would meet with Helen at Ken's. Ken got an apartment directly across the street from Helen, or actually it's catty corner across the street. And that made it easy for them to work together. I mean, they did spend a lot of time working together. They would also spend a lot of time riding in taxi cabs between here and Columbia. Helen didn't like to use subways, so that gave them, they commuted together. So you can imagine, get a lot of work done sitting in the back of a taxi cab every day, going back and forth to work. So that's that as an opening. So we're going to start looking at how many psychotherapists do we have in the room. I know we got one in the first row. We got 2, 3, 4, 5 therapists working, sitting in the room at the moment. Okay, so feel free to chime in at any point. The psychotherapy pamphlet's a little different. Actually, it's not completely different because actually after Ken read it for the first time, his first comment to Helen was, well, this is the same thing as the course. And it was like they were really expecting something different, but it's not. It's just the course expressed in yet another way, right? So, oh, I didn't know. Well, let's start with our first slide. We'll go to back. Yeah, that's not the first slide. Oh, let me, I'm controlling this, aren't I? What am I thinking about here? I didn't know what was on screen. Sorry, guys.
So you think you are.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the beginning. Oh, gosh, I'm going the wrong way. What's going on here? Sorry, okay, you do it. All right, go to 1. Actually, we don't need to keep 1 on screen. Now you can go to 2. Well, actually, let's talk about the quote. Only the mind is in need of healing. That is really the theme of the psychotherapy pamphlet. It's all about the mind. There's a line, of course, says, if the mind can heal the body, but the body cannot heal the mind, then the mind must be the stronger thing. So that's really what we're focusing on. So here's just, it's divided into the purpose of psychotherapy, which is only 2 pages long, the process, which is the essence of the pamphlet, which is 12 pages, and then the practice of psychotherapy, which is just 4 pages to the end. And let's begin. So the pamphlet focuses on the therapist healing their own mind, and we can only help others if our own minds is first healed. There's one point that says the therapist should at least be ahead of the, we'll talk about whether it's a client or a patient or whatever in a minute. So first, let's do a little bit of basic review. Our most fundamental problem is our belief that we're separated from God. Everybody understands that. That's our most basic problem, right? So the ego likes being autonomous. I'll tell you a little story that this week, I don't know, somewhere along the way, somebody sent me, Bonnie Nack's her name, she's a really Course in Miracles thinker. I like people that really spend a lot of time thinking this stuff through and writing little articles. She lives out in Southern California near Temecula. And she told me about a death experience that her daughter had when she was a young girl, I think like 14 years old. And she was baptized at church, I think it was a Baptist church, one Sunday morning. And she came home, and that afternoon after lunch, she went and she laid down. And while she was laying down, she had a death experience, literally a death experience. I don't know why, but she left her body and thought she died, and she'd gone to heaven or wherever. And she said an interesting thing. She said to the powers that be, whatever that is, am I still Michelle? That was an interesting line. Am I still Michelle? And I don't think I've got this 100% right, but this is pretty close to what she heard was, you don't worry about that here. You are known here. Oh, don't worry, dear. You're known here. Isn't that interesting? You're known here. So I once said to somebody, there will be no John Mundy in heaven. and they were upset about that. But no, it doesn't work that way. It's not a matter of our autonomous being. It's not a matter of our individuality. That's not it. You know, it's not. There won't be a John Mundy in heaven, or a Han or a George. And that's not to say that you're not awareness, attention. It's not that that's not there, but the separated being, the sense of separation. We understand. It's about a communion, which transcends the separate self. So the ego likes being autonomous. To solidify the belief in itself, the ego creates the idea of guilt. Now, those of you who have been studying the Course for a long time, the last time our topic was guilt. Guilt is the big problem in the Course, because guilt is the thing which gives us this sense of separation. I mean, this sense of division, that we get kind of locked in, especially to that thing that Eckhart Tolle calls self-talk, that part of the mind which is always chattering and worrying and anxious and going over problems, and there's always problems. You know, there's always one gets solved, another one then appears in its place. And we said in the car coming down today, there's always something. You know the phrase, it's always something. It's a relationship, or it's money, or it's health, or you get one thing cleared up and then another one pops up in its place, and you can worry about some other unfinished business that needs to be taken care of. But that's the guilt and the sense of isolation. Did you ever get the feeling that you kind of had it with yourself? I mean, enough already of me. I'm getting several nods around in the room. It's just like you had about as enough of yourself as you can take, And maybe even you kind of feel like you stop the world, I'd like to get off, or let me out of here. And you can't. There's an interesting thing about that, is there's a line in the Course where it says, the mind never stops. Isn't that interesting? It never stops. It is, even in your sleep, we're dreaming, right? So it's that seems to be a bit of a different world, but then the line from the Course is, it is always creating. The mind is always creating. The question is, what's it creating? Is it creating more guilt? Or is it creating a relationship with the Holy Spirit? So, and I'm gonna, yes?
Can I ask you a question about what you just said?
All right, well, use the mic, please.
Yeah, I don't recall that sentence, but I'm not saying that it's not there. The mind is always creating. But then you said, are we creating guilt? Are we creating, love? But isn't it said, too, that only love can create? So if only love can create, guilt is not a creation. Guilt is a manifestation.
Okay.
Or a miscreation.
Right.
That's a miscreation, right? So it wouldn't be calling a creation.
Very good.
Right. I just wanted to point that. I wanted to sort of validate for myself as well.
Very good. I understand. And because it is a creation which is a miscreation. It's a miscreation. That is right. The right word to use, right? Okay. But in a sense, it's a creation. That's the sense that I was using. The Course distinguishes between making and creating. Yeah. And this is kind of a making. We create a self. After after I read the piece from my friend Bonnie Knack about her daughter, the phrase came to me, and I like this. It was like a little gift. The phrase was, the ego wants to be known. The self wants to know. Right? So the ego wants to be known. Right? That's the autonomy thing, right? And the Course can emphasize this a lot. The basic problem is thank you very much, God, I'd rather do it myself. I'm going to run my own show. You're out of the game because I'm the leader. I'm the one who's in charge of this life process. And God can't stop you from thinking that way. But God would say, but if you could align your mind with mine, things would be working out a lot better. than you trying to build your own world, whatever building your own world means, right? And sometimes too, and I'd like to talk about this a little bit. I'll get back to you in a second, Eric. What the mind miscreates, in that sense, you just look at the world, the miscreations, it can be intense. I saw two things on television this past week that affected me very deeply. Some people say, oh, well, I don't watch TV. I think, well, good. If you're watching the news and sitcoms, I understand. There's no need, but there's a lot of good stuff, I think, on PBS in particular, and science and health and history, and just remarkable. I particularly appreciate PBS's American Master Series, and there was a piece on Edgar Allan Poe this week or so ago and I knew a bit about Poe, but just found the whole thing, because Poe was brilliant. He was an absolute genius, and all I see or seem is but a dream within a dream. That's a quote, right? So he kind of got this whole thing, but he didn't know kind of what to do with it. And on the other hand, he was into himself, and he did a lot of miscreations in terms of relationships in particular, dropping out of college when he didn't have to, and he should have stayed. In terms of his fortunes, it would have been different, etc. But a very deep thing. In fact, his last book was called Eureka, published just before he died. And in it, he postulated, he intuited the theory of relativity, quantum physics, right? I mean, it's amazing that just this came to him not because he had any scientific understanding of anything, but just as a way of getting this future kind of information. Fantastic that that's true, right?
Who was this again?
Edgar Allan Poe. He died very early. He died at the age of 40. He was born in 1809, died in 1949. So he was slightly contemporaneous with Mark Twain, who was a little bit later, 1835 to 1910. They both, and several people, Nietzsche was contemporaneous with them, Leo Tolstoy was contemporaneous. They all kind of figured out that this wasn't a real world, but they didn't know what to substitute it with. There wasn't no exit, there was no out, you know. So Twain just made fun of the damn human race. That was his out, just make a joke out of it. But Poe got into it in a heavy sense. You know, it was like weighed on him. He could get very depressed. On the other hand, he could be very up. He was very kind of bipolar in that sense. He could go either way, right? But be very creative. There's no doubt about that. Now, it's just interesting looking at a mind who's looking at, by the way, one of his famous quotes, and I don't have this exactly right, is that much of his life he spent in blissful insanity and horrible sanity. He saw the sanity as being something which was distracting, and the insanity is more, I mean, that's a very interesting thing to say, right? We wouldn't say that, of course.
What was it that bothered you? You said you were very upset about something.
I'll finish it. Okay. So the second part, what was about a Poe is that he went really deep into the darkness. A lot of people know about, but it wasn't all darkness. It was interesting. He wrote 70 short stories or books, mostly short stories. He created the detective novel. But of those 70, only 12 were macabre. You know, the others were not. You know, the other 50-some, 58 were not. He even wrote comedy, situation comedy kinds of things, and romantic comedies. It's strange that he was able to do that with the same mind, right? At the same time, he kept cutting his own legs off with like relationships that he could have fostered that would have turned out much better, that turned out sour because he attacked Wordsworth, for example. So anyhow, the other thing that really affected me more deeply how many people in the room know who Robert Durst is? Okay, you all know Bob Durst? Okay. And you know that he's up for trial this next year for having killed his best friend. Robert was my roommate in graduate school. Cut that out. In 1966 and 1967, we shared, along with a third person, Myron Blackman, who has passed with MS in the meantime. So I got to know Robert a bit, but I realized that I didn't realize how deeply he was disturbed. Fortunately, I never got on his wrong side. So nothing happened. But I do remember one time that he came home and some girl had broken up with him. And he started throwing things around in the house, particularly books. He just started tearing off the shelf and throwing stuff around and being really upset with this. He'd been rejected, right? He did not like to be rejected. He was very much kind of a loner at the same time that this is true. This autonomy thing, he was very much sort of autonomous. He was really into himself and his head in his own way. Then we met, I remember the three of us met here in New York City one day, went out to dinner, and he told me he was working for the United Nations and in the economics department, and he was earning $600 a week. And I thought back, this was in '69, I thought, wow, I said, you can't even spend that much money a week. And he said, yeah, you're right, you know, I couldn't. I didn't even know he was a multi-millionaire. We never talked about that. He somehow or another kept that secret. And I also realized in reading more about him this past week, doing more research, like there's an interview that was done by a lady who dated him for a while by the Los Angeles Times, how much he lied. He was a chronic liar. He would just make up all sorts of things. He'd meet a new person, he'd tell them what he did, but he'd be a doctor one day and a lawyer the next day, and just whatever he wanted to tell somebody he was doing. But eventually, what came out. Let me finish this. The last time I saw him, strangely enough, we wound up living together, not together, near each other in Westchester. So I had a home in Katona, and he had a home in South Salem. They're kind of neighboring towns. His wife is, theoretically, he said, the last time he saw her putting her on a train in Katona. And after his wife disappeared, he was never charged with a crime. First of all, he never found the body, right? So, and he could afford very expensive lawyers who kept him out of jail. This happened in 1983. He's just now going on trial for murdering not his wife, but his best friend, who they think knew a lot about the wife's missing, all right? And then, yeah, Susan Berman. So I invited him over for dinner one night, just the two of us. I cooked salmon on the grill, and we were sitting outside. I served him dinner, and I'm assuming that he's innocent. That's my assumption. I don't know anything different. I turned and I looked at him and I said, so what do you think happened? He jumped up out of his chair. He looked at me and said, wrong question! And he left. That was the last I ever saw him. All right, now why am I talking about this? We're talking about the level of deep disturbance that can occur in a mind which is very split. So the Course in Miracles says, you know, we're all insane, okay? But most of us are controlled. We have reason, we give a way of relating to each other. We're not so insane that we would react violently against someone who confronted us in some way. I didn't realize what an incredible split he was. Now the Course says, there's no one here that has not entered into darkness. So the very fact that we're here, I mean the very fact that we're in bodies in the world that's a weight, and that we kind of carry. That's what I meant when I said earlier, you ever feel like you had about enough of yourself as you could take? You know? And there's a part of us that wants out. Out of this. I mean, not out of the, we may interpret it as the body, but really out of the insanity of the mind. Now, the good news is, and this really is good news, of course, is there's no one here who is not, in whom the light has gone out completely. So there's always this spark, the little spark. There's that piece of energy, that light, that actually could be reignited and kind of like a flame on a pile of light, even come back into bloom, or into shining, right? So I really felt a lot. I mean, I've been really feeling a lot for Robert, because I realize he's totally isolated, right? I mean, he's probably in solitary. He's in jail someplace out in California. And we can get really upset about a situation like his situation. Remember when the bombing in Boston in a couple years ago? The day, that was on a Tuesday, I think. They found him on a Thursday, I think it was. I was supposed to speak at a church on that Sunday. I had a topic picked out, but I scrapped the topic and I changed the topic to the boy in the boat. And I was talking about, okay, so the whole world is angry or upset with what he killed 9 people, maimed 20-some people. He's been wounded himself. His brother has died. What's going on in the mind of this boy in this boat, having gone through all of that? And how do we see him? And how does God see him? And my suggestion was that God sees a wounded child who has done this incredible thing. And the level of guilt and the deep absorption into insanity, which you had to be insane to go killing other people, was very, very heavy. You know, we just get insane if you feel like you make a mistake. I mean, you insult somebody and wish you hadn't done it, or you attack in some way that you regret having engaged in the attack verbally. All right. So our consciousness is still very frail. We still have a lot of development to be doing. If you just look at, you think about the 20th century with 2 world wars, and the insanity is still going on because we attack at each other. And the main purpose of the ego's use of the body is for attack. Of course, the ego uses the body 3 primary ways. Number 1 is for attack, and we're very good at attack. The problem with attack is it also increases the level of guilt, which drives us, someone like Robert, even more insane. Right? So the insanity just gets caught in this kind of downward, inward spiral that doesn't end. Some people may kill themselves in that process. They're, as often mass murderers do. They wind up killing themselves at the end. They can't be caught. They can't be still alive at the end of whatever this event is. Their lives are literally over because of what they did in terms of their acting out in the world. But the Course is really trying to help us to overcome this sense of separation. And for the therapist as well, the job is to help to heal the mind, to overcome that sense of separation within ourselves, but not only within ourselves, but we're trying to help other people in this process. So let me go on just a little bit. So guilt holds the ego together. That's the point I'm making.
Was there a point to Edgar Poe?
Pardon?
Was there a point to Edgar Allan Poe?
A point?
Yeah, you started with Edgar Allan Poe, then went to Robert Durst.
I did, because they're both examples of this consciousness that got caught really deeply into itself and to darkness and to going within and to getting kind of trapped. And Poe did a lot of destructive stuff, not acting out he wouldn't hurt somebody, but he hurt himself. That's the way we took. We either hurt out and we act out, or we force it in. One of the two. And the Course says that, you know, our disease really is simply are attacking ourselves. So in the process of attacking ourselves, we create, the guilt just causes us, and that comes out somehow or another, right? So that's one. But also I want us to look at that inside ourselves, because it's and this is one of the main things that Ken used to talk about, was look, really look. You got to look deep. You got to look inside. You got to see, you know, even if it's something that you don't like on television or whatever it is. I do some counseling. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I don't think of myself as a psychotherapist. I think of as a teacher. But the psychotherapist is a teacher. And, you know, let me talk about that more in a minute. Let's read this. So the acceptance of guilt into the mind of God's Son was the beginning of the separation, as the acceptance of the atonement is its end. I'm just pointing to the two extreme ends. This is an extreme, Bob's an extreme example, Poe is an extreme example of getting down deep into darkness, right? And not really being able to find a way out. And there was no way out. The more isolated, Robert was really a loner. This person lady that he dated that did the interview for the Lord's Son, just talked about what an incredible loner he was. And everybody would say that, right? The Course is trying to help us to overcome loneliness by realizing it's not just other people that we're connected to, but that there's a greater mind, the mind of the Holy Spirit, which is, if we're connected to that, if you have a sense of relationship with the Holy Spirit, and you act in a loving way with other people, that's going to lift us up out of that loneliness. The whole goal is communion, as I said earlier, right? The mechanism, the Holy Spirit, I talked about the way the ego uses the body, the way the Holy Spirit uses the body, primarily is for the purpose of communication. That's it, it's communication, but the communication is trying to lead us to communion. I mean, doing what God would have us do with our lives, rather than getting into this horribly isolated ego place. You know, egos are very lonely, right? I mean, very, very lonely, right? And the more lonely it is, the more desperate it may become, the less it cares about the world, so that it's actually able to kill other people, right? And also watching that show on Vietnam that was back a couple of months ago on PBS, and how they had to train soldiers to see what's so incredible about becoming a soldier. You have to be trained to kill people. So that's why the Germans are krauts and the Vietnamese are gooks, and because you can't kill a human being. So we dehumanize people. The Course is trying to help us to humanize, I mean, to more than humanize, to see the spirit, the soul, this beautiful being that temporarily is inhabiting a body. James, wait, no, you got to have the mic.
Just an anecdote that might help with this, because it is, when we look at all this carnage, we just sometimes get lost in it.
Right.
It's too much.
Oh, your mic's not on.
I'm just saying, when we have an anecdote maybe that will help. We look at this carnage. I'm kind of fascinated. We like World War II, because we sometimes rationalize our American existence. This was the good war. People were good, and
Right.
And there's nothing good about killing. There's nothing moral about putting a bayonet through somebody's stomach. There's nothing there, and we get
Right.
really lost in this. Mother Teresa had a story, and everybody wants to know how she works and everything like that. And the first time I ever saw Mother Teresa, and it kind of knocked me back emotionally, she went right into this slum in India. And these kids were starving with big eyes. All the kids we see and we go, we get repelled. We don't know what to do. We become apoplectic by just bringing in the reality. And the first thing she would do was touch them. Just touch them like this. Just start touching them. And that kind of blew me away. But she was telling an anecdote about a child in India was a hemophiliac, was dying, was a spare skeleton, and was just dying and suffering. And the nuns were trying to, every time he would bleed, they would get another rag and they would wipe it away, and they couldn't do anything. And they all were desperately trying to save this child. And Mother Teresa looked at the child's eye, and the child was telling him, "I'm okay. I'm okay."
Yeah, on a soul
She was
level.
getting like a higher communication, because when I think about the, how could you do this?
Right.
Because even David Hofmeister said that, like, they asked her, if you knew when you picked up the first child, you know, it would end up being all these years later and all these other children you would have to save and all the things you went through, would you ever pick up that first child? She said, absolutely not.
Really?
Yeah, you know, well, it was kind of an ironic
Right.
joke. But when we see this kind of, you know, degradation of the human form and what we experience around her, it's a hell of a hocus pocus with us. I mean, it stirs us up. Even so, what made her go was she wasn't seeing that. She
Right.
wasn't seeing that. She was communicating.
Of course.
Like you're saying, she was communicating
Right.
with something else. She wasn't seeing the cardinal. She was seeing beings looking back at her saying, I'm okay. I'm just a manifestation.
Wow.
You were grieving
Right.
together to bring you together in a very exalted sense of love.
Right. You've heard me say in the past that, you know, I worked at Sing Sing for 8 years, from 82 to 90, in teaching. And I met some really lovely, lovely, lovely people, some incredible people. But there was something about having the eyeball-to-eyeball relationship. And as their teacher, they had made very big mistakes, otherwise you couldn't be there. You got a minimum of a 3-year sentence to be there. But there was this soul. It's in there. It's, you know, the windows are the eyes of the soul, right? And you can see it if you're given this opportunity. Even in the darkest corners, it's still there and it's still crying out to be touched, actually, right? Let me finish this. So guilt reinforces the idea that a separation actually happened. Projecting guilt gives rise to the outside. It's other than me, not me. It's the outside, right? So let's talk a minute of the course. The course raises this question near the beginning of the pamphlet. It says, the therapist is only a somewhat more specialized teacher of God. He learns through teaching, and the more advanced he is, the more he teaches and the more he learns. This should always be the process. This is kind of an alchemical process that's going on inside all of us, really, because we are always, that's why I prefer to think of myself as a teacher rather than a therapist. Because when I talk to people, it's a lot about re-educating. So if someone starts talking to me about having their buttons pushed or something that upsets them, then I want to throw it back to what buttons? Where'd the buttons come from? What's the origin of the button? You know, what's upset? You know, that's really the question. We want to go all the way, we got to go back to the beginning, to the core that sees it. The Course is asking that we engage in a reversal in thinking and begin to see things another way. So we're not simply projective. We're not finding problems in the world. You're projective in the sense of loving, but not projective in the sense of condemnation. It's a very different sense, right? There are a few more. So the reason the word client, just a second on. Some of you may, many years ago, back in the 70s, the whole question arose, maybe Mark, you can comment on this, whether the term should be patient, because patient implies that the person's sick, right? or another word could be used. And so they came with client. So client was maybe a little better, but now it's a business relationship if you use the word client, right? So that's why I like the word student-teacher relationship better, because and we're all in a student-teacher relationship. So the task of the therapist-teacher then is to assist the awakening process for him or herself and for the patient-student. There's a lot that's in this psychotherapy pamphlet, which is really about not healing the client, patient, student. It's about healing the therapist's mind. Okay, let's get a mic for up front here for Hannah. Just hand it right over to her. And Hannah's been doing therapy for about 40 years here in New York.
Right, yes. And it's very interesting that you said that every time that we work with the patient and touch where the button is, and you come in with the teaching, you come in with the gift that they can choose to learn, you only teach that which you need to reteach to yourself again. So the teaching is something that you already know and that you already give over.
Right.
But it always heals you in a deeper level, in that particular place. Because as a therapist, you can only come from that place. You cannot come from your place or your place. You come from your place where you have done some healing that needs to be healed deeper.
That's
without even knowing sometimes that that's what you need to heal.
Sure.
I often tell my patients, thank you. You just taught me blah, 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 blah.
Right. So guess who gets the most out of these classes? I mean, it's really wonderful, you know, working as a role, Mark's a teacher here, and there's teachers in the room too, because in order to be, and this pamphlet says this actually, in order to be a teacher, a lot of times I've had to teach classes in the past. Once in a while a class I didn't want to teach. And so, I mean, I had to do one on educational psychology once, and I just like, it was really, I had just taught a class on mysticism, and so many of the students came from the mysticism class over to the class, and they said, how come you did such a great job in the mysticism class? And this was really boring. And I said, because it was really boring. Reading the textbook, trying to keep ahead of you guys was, I wasn't learning a lot. But you should be learning. You know, you're always learning kind of ahead of the student, right? Especially if you got some topic that you haven't gone into very deeply before. That's exciting. That's exciting about life, is it keeps taking you deeper, and it's understanding yourself, not just the person that you're working with, but in doing that work with that person, you should be coming to greater understanding of why you are who you are in terms of the way you think in the world. So the student is someone who is sleeping. The task of the therapist teacher then is to assist in waking the process for him or herself. This pamphlet is really about the therapist. It's not about the client, right? And for the patient client. So the special ones are all asleep, surrounded by a world of loveliness they do not see. Freedom and peace and joy stand there beside the bed on which they sleep, and call them forth and waken from their dream of death. It's a dream of death. I look at Robert on television. I look at his eyes. He's lost. He's really lost. You know, there's like no way out. And at this point, there really is no seeming way out at all. You can be sure nobody's loving him. Nobody's loving him, right? And nor is there any sense of connectedness. Yet they hear nothing. They are lost in dreams of specialness. So the more we dream our own, all the mass murders are caught up in some sort of weird dream thing that's going on, right? Otherwise they wouldn't be acting out this way, whatever that weird dream is. But it's a dream. So the Course says there's a thing about no one can serve two masters. Let me read this. So this is from Luke, but the Course also talks about it. No servant can serve two masters, for you will either hate the one and love the other, or else you hold to the one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon has often been translated as money, but it really would better to say that it means the world, the outside, society, what's going on out there, as opposed to serving one's self. You understand what I'm saying? I had this interesting last Sunday, a week ago, today, I was going to speak at Utica. So I got up really early to drive there. It's a 3-hour drive. And I stopped at a corner deli to get a cup of coffee for the drive, and a neighbor of mine comes in. I don't know the fellow, I know he lives in the same set of houses that I do. See him out in his yard, but we're not friends in the sense of socializing with each other. And so I just trying to be sociable, so I said something about, so what are you doing? So what are you doing today? He says, there's a huge Catholic church in the town where I live. And he said, oh, I'm going to church. I got to show my face, you know. And I thought, what? That's an interesting thing to say. He has to show his face. Talk about a dream. Right? And he says, and I want to take my girl. I want her to have some religious education. He doesn't want any religious education. But he thinks it's important that the girl should have the indoctrination in this particular case, right? But that's what we do. We look for it on the outside. Let's go on. Whatever is true is eternal and cannot change or be changed. Spirit is therefore unalterable because it is already perfect. But the mind can elect what it chooses to serve. The only limit put on its choice is that it cannot serve two masters. So this is the basic point of the Course, and this is that it's God or the ego, but God has got to win, and because God already has won. It's got to go 100%, 100%. But 100% is a Jesus. 100% is a Christ. 100% is any mind that is completely said, not my will, but thy will be done. If you're doing the Course, this should be the process that's working for you. You are moving in that direction. Jesus says, it is not I who speak, but the Father who speaks through me. Interesting. My workbook lesson from the Course for today is 296, which is something about may the Holy Spirit's voice speak through me today. All right? Yes, Mike, he's sleeping. Wake him up.
Hi. So I find I find the two masters thing slightly confusing because I am not sure why there needs to always be such a dichotomy. Why can we not serve God by being in the world, doing good for other people, helping other people, and so forth? And I guess my question to you is, how do you reconcile that? And if you cannot serve two masters, which master are you serving personally? Because you know, obviously, you know, everyone has their own perception of things, but
Sure.
From my perception, it seems like you're serving the world. You're not, you know, you're not in a monastery, isolating
Right.
yourself. So it seems like you're actually out in the world serving the world, but you know, are you not serving God at the same time, and are you in fact serving two masters then, or not?
Got it. So ultimately, there's just one. Ultimately, it is a matter of just being God and moving in that direction, reaching Christ consciousness, or whatever it is that, whatever term you want to use, could be something besides Christ consciousness. Awakenness, just being aware. So the best that I can say is I'm trying to move in that direction. Trying to move. We're all trying to move in that direction. We're all trying to move toward that. And so my job somehow or another became one of working on this in a public kind of way. That's all there is to it. It's really very simple. I've always been a teacher. So this is what I like to teach. I'm not going to teach geography or some other history or something else that's interesting. We want to teach where we want to get to eventually. Don't claim to be there. Don't claim to be home. Don't claim to be realized. That's you can only do that if you're really there. Mary?
So,
Yeah.
I would like to say that this gentleman
Martin.
here, I was thinking the same thing. But what my mind told me, and maybe it was God or my ego, I'm not really sure, and I don't really care.
Okay, good.
But I go by the experience moment by moment. That's how I look at it, and that makes me feel better. And I also add choose once again to it, choose again, choose again.
Right.
And moment by moment kind of makes me be able, ego-wise, to put that aside, put the ego part aside, and join with the mind of God.
Right. I had a friend, Martin, who was a rabbi, who retired and went to live in Florida. But he didn't play golf, and he couldn't be retired. So he came out of retirement, and he came, but what does a rabbi do? A rabbi teaches, right? So the rabbi was in his blood. So that's what he did. He just stayed a rabbi until he left this planet. If you understand, that answers your question. Right. Stop.
The way I hear that is that's only a statement to really think about if you're in conflict. Because if you are, accepting of God and the oneness of God, if you are, of the oneness, then that force will support everything you do, whether you're Mother Teresa or a nurse or a teacher or whatever. But if you find that, that to serve God is in conflict with your work, or your life, then it's a problem. That's when the question, statement, you cannot serve two masters.
Well, it could only be in conflict if you're doing something that goes against the whole, against, you're engaged in some illegal activity or you're, et cetera, then.
Precisely. So to serve the world, is, there's no, it's all one in that respect.
Right, yes.
So it's not a master, it's, but I think it's a misconception to think that to be at one with God, one has to have a monastic life.
Yes, exactly. In fact,
I think that's a misconception.
I do too. Because actually what you want to do is you want to fulfill your life in whatever way that seems to be. We've got artists in the room, we've got photographers in the room, et cetera, who feel called very much that that's what they're supposed to be doing. But like I say, you got to do what you feel you're called to do, and as a process of doing that, you're also fulfilling the kingdom, so to speak. You're headed back home again in that process. Hannah?
Because we do not become by ourselves. We become through each other. And as the Course says, we're constantly choosing between heaven and hell. So once you get an insight for yourself, it's there, but it does not become true until you apply it, because we're all one, ultimately.
Very good. Thanks,
And
Hannah.
so the choice is between heaven and hell. The choice is between love and fear. And love is the only choice that we have that is in the infinite.
That's what it means by you can't serve two masters, right? Ultimately, there's only one.
In closing, if you chase two rabbits, you'll catch neither one.
This guy's from Texas. A few more and then we'll take a break. So the Course says that our biggest problem is the authority problem. That's our biggest problem. And the problem is whose will rule. And are we going to let God direct our lives, or are we going to be the directors ourselves? And if we're going to be the directors and, the blind leads the blind, we fall into the ditch, and it's not going to work. The ego is a tyrant. It really is. And it can take over a mind, which can then take over a lot more than engage in terrible destruction. So if it does not freely elect to do so, it, the mind, retains its creative potential. This will go back to what you're talking about, Brad, but places itself under tyrannious rather than authoritarian control. So that's the question. Is my mind run by this tyrannous thing, this ego, or the rather authoritative control, which would be GPS, God's plan for I'm following God's plan for salvation. As a result, it imprisons, because such are the dictates of tyrants. To change your mind means to accept, means to place it at the disposal of true authority, right? Which is not your authority, it's true authority, it's doing God's will. And when you're doing God's will, by the way, it feels good. It just feels natural. It's like when you do something, for example, to help someone, spontaneously, just because it's in your heart to do it for no good reason other than the fact that you want to do it, you feel the impulse to do it, then you're placing it under real authority. A couple more here. So, right and wrong-mindedness. So the Course talks about right and wrong-mindedness. So wrong-mindedness is the part of our split mind that contains the ego. That is the choice for sin, guilt, fear, and attack. And wrong-mindedness imprisons us in the world of separation. I see Robert imprisoned. Forget about the prison walls, but imprisoned in a mind that has no way out of the mind, right? And that's really trapped. I mean, we can all do that to ourselves. But hopefully, one of the purposes of therapy is that we help us get out of prison, right? So we're not isolated. We're not. Right-mindedness is the part of our split mind that contains the Holy Spirit, the voice for God, the voice of forgiveness and reason. So this is where the Course is trying to get us to. And your task as a therapist is really try to help somebody to get to their own right mind so that they can change the mind for themselves. This is all about changing the mind or helping someone to see correctly. That's why, as I said earlier, if somebody starts talking about being upset or having buttons pushed, then I really want to push it back to what's behind that. You cannot be insulted. You cannot be attacked. The Course is very, very clear about that. Unless you think you can. If you think you can, if you adopt it, if you take that in, then it's true.
And John, these are the two masters that we're speaking about.
Yes.
You know, whichever one of these we're serving in our own mind at any given time, whichever one we're choosing is the master we're following.
Right.
And if you teeter talk back and forth, you know, we're chasing, we're split back and forth, we don't land on either. We catch neither one of them. So it's really being vigilant in our practice, because if we're not vigilant in right-mindedness, the vigilant will always lie in wrong-mindedness, because that's what we decided long ago. That's why we have to step up to the plate,
right,
and be aware, because if we're not choosing right-mindedness, we stay lost in both of them in the conflict.
The Course talks a good deal about vigilance. Again, Ken talking about looking, about making the right kind of choices. And if you if you can make the right kind of choices, we are very habitually, all of us are, oriented, and it becomes a habit. Bad habits pull us down the hole, and the good habits can begin to lift us up out of there. But what mind are you training yourself? Because then it becomes you are in charge of training your own mind, so you can do that. Right? We'll take a break at 2:45, 5 minutes. A couple more. Temptation has one lesson it would teach in all its forms. Whether it occurs, it would persuade the Son of God he is a body. One of the things we're learning here is that you're not a body. I mean, that we've talked about this many times before. This is one of the basic teachings of the Course. I am not a body, I am free. That sentence appears more than any other sentence in the Course. it's repeated more than any other sentence in the Course. It's really trying to help us to understand. And there's a certain freedom in that. There's a lot of freedom in that. I mean, thank God you know, that you're not a body. Because if this is all there is, then as the Peggy Lee song says, let's keep dancing. Because there's more going on. So psychotherapy helps us to develop a relationship with the right mind. That's what we're looking to do. And honey, you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say that about the imprisonment, that is the basic nature of addiction.
Right. Say it again.
That imprisonment that we were talking about earlier is the core, it's the basic nature of addiction.
Right, because you're imprisoned to whatever the addiction is.
And also the belief that the body is real, because then you can justify addiction to food, money, sex,
Whatever.
substances, whatever.
And if you keep feeding the addiction, then that just leads into deeper guilt all the time. And the deeper guilt is isolation. That's what I was talking about earlier. And the isolation is the loneliness and the despair and the brokenness, because you're not a part, and you know it. I mean, you know you're not a part of the whole. There's a place in the Course where it talks about the attraction of guilt, and another place where it talks about the attraction of God. And what it says in both cases is it can become like a magnet that pulls you. So just as guilt pulls you into guilt and even into more guilt, if you can turn this process around and begin to be pulled toward God, that's what the mystics are. The mystics are those who are more and more and more willing to give the mind over to following the lead of God. You're feeling seduced by the eternal, which is a good feeling. I mean, you want to be able to be seduced by the eternal. Whereas this other side is pulling us into deeper despair and increasing the split in the mind. If you can't reach self-realization here in this world at this time, at least let's get our foot on the right path. You know, let's at least get going in the right direction, which is what the Course is trying to get us to do by reversing the way we think. We'll do one final slide and then we'll take a break. Okay? So the purpose of psychotherapy is to help us awaken by looking at the relationship we have with our minds. That's the place. That's what I always want to take people back to. We used to talk about as Charlie the chooser. Who's the decider? Our minds get us into trouble. Our mind's choice can also get us out of trouble. It's just a matter of making that choice. We're asked to look at our choices and forgive our decisions to separate from our source. It's that simple. So,
You know, I just watched a video last night of Kenneth Wapnick where he said, if you never become aware of who is the decision maker, you will never awake.
right. That's really key. That's central. This is another one of the central teachings again, was who is the decision maker? Where is that happen? Where's that key that turns that? So I can begin to make the right, and it has to do, chapter 22, section 2, responsibility for sight. Responsible, and the more responsible we are, the better you're going to feel. Mary?
So what part of the person or soul or spirit is recognizing and asking the question, who is the decision maker? Because that's where I'm a little confused when I read the workbook about ego and God. My mind, God is from God and part of God. I understand the Holy Spirit is a bridge. However, and when you talk about you make your decision to turn to God and such like that, I'm really at odds to understand, is this the part of my ego that is better than another part of my ego? Really?
Yeah,
it
no.
gets kind of murky.
Right, it could get murky. And no, let's keep in mind that there really is no ego. I mean, that's not a part of reality at all. So when I'm making this choice, I am making it in alignment with Spirit. Your question is, who's the I that's making the decision.
And
right?
who is the you that you just mentioned?
Right. It's the same thing. We only know this by doing it, and the more we can make that right decision, the more we feel it. We feel the alignment, so we know we're going in the right direction. Just as you actually know, you know when you're making that wrong choice. So, but you're right. That's a really good question. Is who's that decision maker there?
Thank you.
Let's break until 3 o'clock, and then we'll come back and.